all the way up through the middle parts of the south. And so far, it's left a pretty big mess in its wake. So obviously, you can look on the radar right now, and you can see we've got that frozen precipitation in those blues and pinks all the way from the southwestern parts of Texas, really the Texas-Mexico border, even seeing some rain, snow, freezing rain, all the way up through the central parts of the Dallas-Fort Worth metro, into Arkansas, Memphis, western Tennessee, northern Mississippi as well. Let's check this out, this video yesterday. This is a video that my mom sent me. My parents live just north of the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. This is Lantana, Texas. You can see this is sleet, not snow. So these are ice pellets, the little sleet pellets coating the ground there. And this was in the course of about 45 minutes. We went from just a little bit on the ground to an accumulation where she measured it, and it was over a foot of sleet accumulation. You can see that there, how it kind of mounds there because of that. A total of a foot of sleet. That's kind of ridiculous to see it drift like that. You normally get snow drifts that are that high. Sleet drifts are something completely different and definitely completely crazy. So far, the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex has basically been completely shut down because of this. There's that good photo of the measurement, a solid foot of sleet. But the Dallas-Fort Worth Metro is, as I mentioned, basically completely shut down. We can see right now we've got winter storm warnings up in effect. That does include the entire metro area. Both airports of Dallas-Fort Worth and Dallas Love Field are seeing massive delays there. So airplanes having a tough time. Traffic in pretty much our metroplex is basically not moving right now, and people are very much encouraged to, if you don't have to be on the roads, to not be there, because we are seeing this round of wintry precipitation falling frozen, and behind it we'll have more rain falling that will become freezing rain this afternoon into this evening, leading to even slicker conditions out there. This is kind of worst case scenario when you get freezing rain on top of the existing ice from the sleet. This is going to take several days to melt. So we're going to be watching traffic issues now here through probably Thursday, if not into Friday morning. And interestingly enough, by the end of the week into the weekend, we're going to see highs for Dallas in the mid to upper 50s. So if you are headed out there across any of Texas today, just be super, super careful. If you don't have to be on the roadways, don't be on the roadways. We'll talk a little bit more about this winter storm and the existing traffic impacts on the eastward side of it coming up in our next look at weather. But right now, Isaiah Buchanan is here for our first check of the Social Roundabout.
Welcome into Social Roundabout, everyone. I'm Isaiah Buchanan, and there was an interesting happening in Atlanta early Saturday morning. An officer was pulling over someone for having a headlight out. This is part of that video right here. He's pulling someone over for having a headlight out, and as it happens, somebody gets in his cop car and just drives off. The officer then starts to alert others that his vehicle has been stolen and where that car is heading. Video shows the car heading down the highway, and you're gonna see here in just a few moments that the car attempts to go over some train tracks, and when it does, it's going to get stuck. And when it gets stuck, the officers, then all of the ones that were following this said car, begin to come in, surround it. But there's a train coming, so they have to get this man out of the car before the train hits him. You can hear how scared he is. He's like, there's a train, there's a train. I mean, the man is terrified trying to get out of the vehicle. Luckily, they were able to get him out and he was safe. But that suspect was arrested and charged with several different he had several different charges on that arrest. So pretty interesting things happening down in Atlanta. Don't steal cop cars, people. Come on, it's not that hard. It's really not. Now we're moving to the other side of the country, out in Hawaii, where a family had a boulder come flying through their home. Take a look at this video.
You okay? Whoa. Whoa, rock fell out. Whoa. Oh my God. What happened? Oh shit, rock. Oh.
You can see the lady right there in the maroonish colored shirt. If she would have been a step or two ahead of where she was at, she would have been hit by that boulder. Now, it ended up coming to a stop in somebody's bedroom, and what really stinks for this family is that they had just moved in about a month prior. They had basically torn down the home that was on the property where they were living and rebuilt that entire house. And to only be in there for a month before that happens, or after that happened, after moving in a month after a boulder hits your home, that's just really, really unfortunate. That's all I have for this edition of Social Roundabout, but right now I'm going to toss things back over to Kaylee and Anthony.
Isaiah, that's not just a boulder. It's a rock.
Is that a quote from something?
SpongeBob.
Oh,
You gotta-
I know SpongeBob.
There you go.
There's
I was
something like
saying,
that too.
thank you for that social roundabout. Interesting stories this morning for sure. We'll talk to you a little bit later. Right now, we're going to welcome in our next live guest. We've got Joanna Marsh, our rail writer, to talk all about the Kansas City Southern Canadian Pacific merger and where that currently sits with the Surface Transportation Board. Joanna, thanks for being here. And let's just dig right in. What is the STB saying about this merger?
Yeah, so as part of the merger process, the Office of Environmental Analysis with the Surface Transportation Board created a environmental impact statement, kind of looking at, obviously just for any sort of major project, like what sort of environmental impacts might occur. And so there was a draft EIS, environmental impact statement, in October, and I think there was some. Actually, I might not be correct about the October date, but there's a draft ES. But the point is that the final version of the environmental impact statement was released last Friday, and that kind of is one more. I don't want to say hurdle, but one more sort of milestone that the proceeding has to pass through in order for the Surface Transportation Board to make their decision about whether to approve the merger between Kansas City Southern and Canadian Pacific.
And Joanna, when we're looking at this merger, are there any other types of headwinds that would kind of slow this process down, especially thinking about noise pollution and things like that?
Yeah, no, I think everything is pretty, now it's just kind of a wait and see moment. In the first draft environmental impact statement, the main conclusion out of what could be the effects of the merger was noise pollution, and which was kind of surprised. I don't say surprised, but that there weren't more environmental impacts that could be coming from the merger. I mean, of course, there are impacts, but to the extent I mean, all of them will be mitigated. Of course, you do have. When the Surface Transportation Board held a hearing on the merger in September and October, I think one of the biggest takeaways was just sort of the Houston and Chicago communities. You have actually two different angles going at it. You have the operational side of things, how will the merger affect operations in both areas, which both see a lot of traffic. And of course, with Houston, you also have, Union Pacific and BNSF trains, and Chicago is a major interchange. And then you have the local communities of those two places seeking to address a lot of sort of grade crossing issues like blocked crossings. And so the environmental impact statement did look at those issues, but the purpose of the environmental impact statement is a little bit different from those issues, and so they did address it in the final EIS, in sort of in the sense that working CP and KCS working with the communities there to address their concerns, but still at the end of the day, noise was the main concern, and there were no additional other findings, I guess, beyond sort of discussing what issues are on the minds of residents and the other Class 1 railroads, quite frankly.
So I live, for context on all of this, what I'm about to say, I live literally 600 feet from a Norfolk Southern rail line, right? Like it is right in my backyard. And the train schedule right there, it's one a day and it comes through between like 8:30 and 9 at night, and that's just kind of like how it is. And the noise pollution there, it's there, but it's not terrible, right? And I can only assume that the majority of Americans, especially in kind of this like mid-suburban area, live pretty close within a rail line. When you're talking about doubling up that amount of rail traffic, is there any actual numbers on what the noise pollution levels look like, or is it all kind of just this is what the residents think about their hearing and so they're allowed to comment on it because they're the ones experiencing it?
Right, right. I mean, I think that noise pollution has been kind of an sort of an ongoing issue in general, and I'm sure that the Federal Railroad Administration and the freight railroads, have looked at the issue. So it's it's not new. And to be honest, I'm not sure exactly what data is out there, but I'm sure that it is an issue that has been and is being studied. Especially considering that. The freight railroads will keep going. The operations will keep going. Even if there wasn't a merger, this so you might not have the number of trains increase, but you still have the issue about noise pollution. And so I think it is something that. That freight railroads have been trying to work with local communities to address, and I believe that there are some, that there are actually quite a few examples from other places about how you look into that issue and sort of how to alleviate that, and obviously it's something that. CP, in the interest of wanting to get their merger approved, is looking at as well.
Timeline look like and certain benchmarks look like as this continues to develop?
I'm sorry, what was the question? I didn't catch the part. Sorry.
Sure. What does the timeline look like, and what are the benchmarks that we're going to be seeing and expecting in the coming months here?
Yeah. So Canadian Pacific has been saying for a while that they expect decision on from the STB sometime in the first quarters, which we are in now, through March. And now that the final EIS has been published or been released, it really that's just the sort of. I feel like it's the last remaining thing that was kind of holding the STB from making. Its decision or announcing its decision. For what it's worth, most people seem to think that that the merger will go through, and if the merger goes through, both railways have said that even combined it would still be the smallest Class 1 railroad. So from 7 Class 1 railroads to 6 Class 1 railroads, and CP and KCS combined would still be sort of the sixth in terms of size. But whether there would be another railroad merger after that between Class 1 railroads, people are kind of thinking that won't happen. So this could potentially be the last one between 2 Class 1 railroads.
Joanna, last question here. I know we're talking kind of about the environmental impacts, but something that had been mentioned a lot at the beginning stages of this merger was kind of the competitiveness and the problems that shippers feel like they would have with their options if this merger went through. Is that still an issue, or are people kind of more accepting that their options are still going to be okay?
I think for shippers, especially captive shippers, I think that competition issue is still, in general, something that they want more of. They would want more competition. So I think regardless of the merger, the calls for increased competition won't go away. I think, what was I going to say now? I think a lot of the, I would say concerns. A lot of the issues that have been brought up during this whole merger proceeding have actually been from the Class 1 railroads themselves, kind of talking about, particularly Union Pacific and BNSF, who would be have faced more competition from a combined CP-KCS line, which I guess for a shipper might work to their advantage. So there is that possibility as well that the shippers haven't really been as vocal compared with the Class 1s about the merger. Of course, shippers have voiced their opinions in terms of we want competition, but in terms of like actual I don't say objections, but actual, reservations. It's really been from the Class 1 railroads.
Awesome, Joanna. Thanks so much for covering this topic for us. And we're, of course, looking forward to hearing more of it, I'm sure, from you and Mike on People Speaking Rail.
All right, you can catch People Speaking Rail on Thursday afternoons right here on FreightWaves TV. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now right after this.
To an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
Hey everybody, this is Thomas Watson, Enterprise Trucking Carrier Expert here at FreightWaves, telling you about my show, Loaded and Rolling. Now, it involves trucking topics for large carriers and even small ones that wish to be large. Anything that impacts trucking, you can get it there. You can catch us every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern on tv.freightwaves.com. We do it live.
And welcome back to FreightWaves Now, continuing to talk about the major storm going on across the southern parts of the United States right now, but this time focusing on the warm side. And this line between the warmer air, I guess I should call it, and that cold air, the line between rain and freezing precipitation is razor sharp today. So let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events. On the front side, on the warm side, we've got mostly rain, actually all rain falling right now. That does include for us here in Freight Alley and just along the I-59 corridor down into Huntsville, I-59 down into the Birmingham area, as well as on that warm side. But on the backside from I-65 northward into Nashville, I-24, once you get up and into the Cumberland Plateau from us here in Chattanooga, you are really riding that line between rain and the wintry mix. Because of that, we've got winter weather advisories in place along those interstates moving to the southeast into the direct east from Nashville, and along I-40 moving westward into Mississippi and then westward into Memphis. With I-40 in Memphis right now, I-40 crossing the Mississippi River into Arkansas is completely shut down this morning because there is about a 40-car accident there because of the freezing road temperatures there. I mentioned this yesterday, but it's pretty interesting that the I-40 corridor, really from Memphis westward into Little Rock, it's got a lot of those little tiny bridges that move over the top of all of the streams and the estuaries that feed into the Mississippi River Delta. And so because of this, there's lots of opportunity for icing going on those roadways. Bridges ice faster than the real roads, which is what's making I-40 super dangerous there moving west out of Memphis. Today, you can expect more interstate closures as well as more accidents over around these areas, especially as you have these little bouts of freezing rain and sleet moving in and out throughout the entire day today. There's kind of this line, as I mentioned before, heaviest rain is on the front side right now, but on the back side, we will see more frozen precipitation moving in and up to the northeast out of Dallas into Arkansas and then eventually into the Memphis area again today. Ice storm warnings in place all the way from the corners of Arkansas, including the Little Rock Metro, up into Memphis, Jackson, Tennessee, and then farther up to the northeast. We've got winter weather advisories as we move into Kentucky. We're going to keep a watch on this as we continue to progress throughout the rest of the week. But again, looking at another few days here of this winter weather across the southeast, we're really going to be riding that fine line between rain and snow here in Chattanooga as well. We'll see if the cold air can win out. We'll talk more about weather coming up in our second hour of FreightWaves Now. Right now, we'll toss things back over to Anthony Smith.
Awesome, Kaylee. Thanks so much for that update. Right now, we're going to welcome on our next guest, and we have our very own Mary O'Connell, our 3PL expert. Mary, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Anytime. Thanks for having me, guys.
So, Mary, just jumping into it, we're talking about some new regulations for the border. What are we looking at here?
Yeah, so basically, the Customs and Border Patrol came out with some new guideline regulations for freight brokers that do deal with cross-border. And so this is cross-border between the U.S. and Canada and U.S. and Mexico. It's not exclusive to just one country. But basically, it's going to make a lot of the smaller brokers it's going to make it easier for them to operate on a national scale. These regulations are kind of modernizing some of the old stuff. So it's doing a lot of things, online forms instead of filling out a piece of paper, mailing or faxing it in, stuff like that, where it's like just kind of catching up with technology today. These new regulations and rules, they actually were okay. They came up, they were all agreed on by the Border Patrol, the Commercial Customs Operation Advisory Committee, and also the broker community, because it was kind of silly to try and make a regulation if you're not actually going to ask the people that, have to live with them. But the biggest thing to come out of this new set of regulations is that there is a national certification for brokers. And so that means that they aren't going to have to go and get local state licenses in every single state they want to operate in, which mostly in Texas, if you have a couple locations, you only have to file with Texas, it's fine. But if you're doing stuff in, Arizona, New Mexico, California, and you're also handling some import business up in Canada, then you're not having to file different local filings to set up a broker shop. You're not have to filing that with each individual state. So that's the biggest advantage that's coming from this new regulation, is that you just have to file it one time with the government. It is a little bit more expensive than the current filings, but you don't have to do it for each state you're in. So it's kind of a net positive.
Yeah, I think that's super fascinating, Mary, and welcome on to the show, by the way. I know that a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the value of finding a really good customs broker and the value that can add to your business as a shipper. And then we also talked a little bit about the value of becoming a really good customs broker. And if you can diversify yourself from a broker standpoint, you can really help out a lot of folks, win a lot of freight, and do a lot of business. Do you think that this new regulation will make it easier for now shippers to find that really awesome customs broker, and then for the broker who maybe wants to dabble in it to become that awesome star?
I think there's definitely a place for those that are awesome to, rise to the top as they would. I don't think that every customs broker is amazing, but that's okay. You need to have competition. You need to have the best, so that way those that want to be the best can have something to work towards. Everybody's got a place. It's fine. Because not everyone wants to pay the price for the best, which, they'll end up paying for it on the back end more than likely when something goes wrong. But I do think that this is going to make things easier for some of those small to medium-sized brokers that are very good at what they do. They just might not have the volume that a national brand might have. Like they might not do $1 million a month or whatever in volume or revenue. They might do a little bit. It might just be a small part of their business or something that they want to start getting into that they might have otherwise not really been able to do. So it does kind of have like a two-edged sword here. So in the so now with this new the national license, small to medium brokers can operate on literally any port in the United States. They can import anything. So anything from like the Port of Jacksonville to North Dakota to wherever. They can have one license and operate anywhere, which is great, especially if they have a smaller fleet. They don't have to almost set up shop at all these different ports. They can just say, oh no, yeah, we got a fleet guy. We'll run them back and forth, or, they can just kind of have a driver that maybe like lives in that area that's familiar with that freight, and they can just kind of go from there, and that way they have it, and that office would just handle the paperwork. So it's kind of really cool that it's giving these people the opportunities that they have. And then it's just the only big change comes with some of that self-reporting stuff.
And Mary, what's the timeline look like? Are these implications already in place, or is it something that's going to be happening in the coming months?
So I believe that these regulations are already in place. These were recommended in the fall of last year, so I'm pretty sure it was one of those recommendeds that just kind of started at the first of the year, like everything does. Because there's not really a big change to how the brokers are handling their business. It's just when it comes to getting licenses. And so it's making it, like I said, it'll reduce the overall cost of licenses, or reduce the overall amount of licenses they need to get in each one. But that national license was just a little bit more expensive. So, and it's a little bit, it goes like up like $100 or $200, not thousands. But the only thing that did come from it that really changes how a broker works is that self-reporting. So basically they have to notify both Customs and Border Patrol, their shipper, and pretty much anyone else that they do business with, that they have had a breach in security. And that's more than just like, oh, someone we didn't recognize came on our lot. No, it's the breach, physical breach, which is someone showing up that they don't recognize or wasn't authorized. And also electronic breaches. So any kind of ransomware, spyware, anything like that might have been a data breach with their own data, they have to then report that within 72 hours of finding it to the Customs and Border Patrol, as well as their importer clients as well, to let them know that there has been a data breach, because they have to keep tabs on those and to kind of determine whether it was created through an operating system error or it was used through like a third party, whether it's a customs importer or a 3PL or anything like that. They have to provide documentation as to what happened with this data breach, and they have to provide it to Customs and Border Patrol as just like another layer of security through this new regulation process.
It's interesting to watch for sure, and exciting to see that these regulations are finally catching up into the digital age. Mary, it's a Tuesday, which means that we've got Check Call coming up this afternoon. Can you give us a little bit of a sneak peek of what to expect on today's show?
Yeah, this week we are having our absolute favorite, David Spencer, back with another market update. I like to call it a new, improved, but still the same David Spencer. And we're talking about the market, if we think we found a floor, just kind of double checking some of those predictive rates that Arrive sends out. And yeah, it's going to be a funny episode, and we're going to have a good time. It airs on FreightWaves TV today at 12:30. So just don't click off anywhere. Just keep watching FreightWaves Now, and it'll take you right into Check Call.
I love it. I'm looking forward to that episode. Mary, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Anytime. Thanks for having me, guys.
And of course, if you missed today's episode of Check Call, you can find that on demand on tv.freightwaves.com. Head over to freightwaves.com/communities and sign up for Mary's newsletter, as well as Running on Ice, because she's writing that one too.
Busy woman. Right now, we're going to keep you guys busy and on it with your updates, because we have another carrier update with Donnie Gilbert and Tony Mulvey.
Welcome into this carrier update. And Donnie, it's Tuesday, which means we're going to take a look at the drive-in market. Starting out, looking at volumes there in that blue line, some positive signs heading into the end of the month.
Yeah, we saw volume kind of start to tip back up here just a little bit right here at the end of the month. Still a little bit lower than what we had as we kind of started the January. But we also saw rejection rates just barely start to come back up, which is good to see that they're reacting to the increase in volumes. Problem is, we already saw it happen to the NTID. NTID fell through the bottom down to 244.
Yep.
So while the market is reacting a little bit, still spot rates are very, very low. And the majority of that reason of that is because so much of the freight is being accepted right now. Mm-hmm. But we're still, at least we're seeing rejection rates respond as volumes increase, which tells us, yeah, The responsiveness doesn't mean that shippers are 100% in control.
Yep.
But they still have definitely the upper hand right now.
Yep.
So if this were to surge and we saw this pick back up, we could see those spot rates start to increase fairly rapidly.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's really going to be capacity driven, any upward movement in rates, at least until capacity leaves the market. I mean, we saw an uptick, but we went from what, 3.5 to 3.57. So I mean, it's really, the
minimal.
increase is very small.
But at least it's reacting.
Yeah.
It's kind of what I was kind of pointing towards. So if we saw a good spike in volumes, then we could see a little bit better, which would be the same initial thing, drying up all that excess capacity. Next chart here. So I want to go ahead and pull this up on a map thing so we can see where all the higher rejection rates are. And of course, you see up here in the western portion of the Midwest, very rural, a lot of places where people don't want to run, a lot of weather affecting that. Of course, right now we got weather affecting all through the middle, which actually could help a lot of people today push those spot rates up.
Yep.
As some of these loads that are picking up here through the Ohio Valley are getting rejected because of weather, they might be able to jump in there this afternoon and say, yeah, I'm going to pick it up and push those rates up. And then, of course, they may not actually get it picked up and pick up tomorrow morning, but still get the same rate. So weather definitely, end of the month, definitely both those could affect spot rates, especially through the Midwest as we got that weather going through. Not a lot going on here in the Southeast with, the higher rejection rates are definitely out in the Midwest and maybe a little bit over towards Memphis and Nashville. But the next chart here, we want to pull up and look at the change. And as we look at the change, we saw that, Louisiana down here, New Orleans was kind of blue already. We see a darker blue right here. So this is one that we'll keep an eye on. Definitely Indianapolis, Columbus, Baltimore. We see some gems that could possibly be sticking up at it, all this, Tony. So what we're going to do, of course, we're going to mark these markets down. We're going to look at some of the markets here in our next session, and then we'll figure out what we're going to bring up for our lanes today.
Awesome stuff. Thank you, Donnie, for this update. We'll be sure to check in with you again a little later. Right now, we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back after that.
Welcome back to another edition of Check Call. Check Call. Check Call. Check Call. Let's go. Nobody works for free, so why should we be expecting our drivers to? Okay, let's just get it together now. What are some of those proactive steps that you can start taking now? For myself, I would like the Earth to still be here for a little bit longer, but is a hot dog a sandwich?
Oh, okay. Is pizza an open-faced sandwich? It's bread.
I have been ready for this question. I've seen the show.
We're all in this together.
Thanks for making me hungry. Now I want a hot dog.
You're welcome. Catch episodes of Check Call Tuesdays at 12:30 on FreightWaves TV. Keep up with all things Check Call on freightwaves.com/checkcall. See you on the internet.
What does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked. People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation, inflation, inflation. This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now, everyone. I'm Isaiah Buchanan, and this is Social Roundabout, where we take a look at what's trending on social media. And there's some things in life that you shouldn't do that should be understood. Not eating Tide Pods or not stealing a cop car. But apparently, you still have to tell people not to do that. This video is from the Atlanta Police Department from over the weekend. While an officer was pulling someone over for having a headlight out, you'll notice that he turns back to his car. Somebody has gotten in his vehicle and drives off. And the officer tries to follow, but of course you can't chase down a car because they're much faster than us, and he alerts other officers in the area that his car has been stolen. The car drives down the highway for several miles, and in just a second you'll see that it tries to go over some train tracks, and that's where the end of the line was for this driver. The car goes over the train tracks and ends up flipping on its side and gets stuck there. Now then all of the officers collapse on that area, and they're working to get the suspect out of the car. And while they're doing this, you'll start to notice that there is a train horn in the background. They narrowly got this man out of the car right before a train comes by, and you can see how nervous that suspect was trying to get out of the vehicle, yelling, "Train, get me out of here." So he ends up being arrested, and he is facing several different charges. But yeah, don't steal a cop car. That should just be an understood thing in life. Switching things up a little bit, a family in Hawaii now has a giant hole in the side of their house after a boulder rolled through part of their living room and into a bedroom of this house. Take a look at this video.
You okay? Whoa. Whoa, rock fell out of you. Oh. Oh my God. What happened? Oh shit, glass. Oh.
You can see that one lady was almost taken out by the SpongeBob fans out there. The pioneers must have put in the wrong address on the boulder. So that's all I have for this edition of the Social Roundabout. Right now, I'm going to toss things over to Kaylee and Anthony. They're going to tell us what's coming up here at FreightWaves here in the next few weeks.
Nothing as exciting as a boulder breaking through your house. But you know what? Is that a form of transportation, you think?
I heard the pioneers used to ride those bad boys for miles.
There you go. Do you think that we could get boulders involved in Global Supply Chain Week somehow?
That would be a good one.
Raw materials
Or
transport?
do we do a Global Supply Chain Week in Boulder, Colorado?
Oh, there it is.
All I know is I'm going to have some Krusty Krab pizza for lunch today. Anyway, we have some events coming up in the near future. We have Global Supply Chain Week, and that's right around the corner. And you have a lot of time to get registered for it still.
Absolutely. And the most exciting thing about Global Supply Chain Week is one, that it's free, and two, that free registration comes with a handful of prizes. And look at that. We've got those prizes up on the screen right now. You can get a cooler. You can get a Yeti chair. You can get an Apple TV. Hey, you get that Apple TV and you download the FreightWaves TV app and you get to watch us for free every single day, 24/7, honestly, if you wanted to. A solo stove, a big green egg, a set of AirPods Max so you don't have to listen to your noisy coworker in the next cubicle over. The list goes on and on, Anthony. It's great.
I don't know what a big green egg is, but I want one now.
You can't have a big green egg in an apartment complex. I'll just tell you that much.
It's kind of like the Traeger grill as well, right?
Yeah, it's a smoker, so it's the same thing. Anyways, head on over to live.freightwaves.com and get registered for that Global Supply Chain Week. Content that you don't want to miss. And while you're over there, get ready and get registered for our live events as well. Future Supply Chain will be here before you know it at the end of June. Right now, we're going to take a look at the last 24 hours in freight with our market update, and then we'll be right back.
to an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June. Welcome back to FreightWaves Now, starting off your 10 a.m. hour with our next look at your top stories on FreightWaves.com. The benchmark diesel price posted an increase for the second week in a row, but prices in futures and wholesale markets are back on another downturn. The DOE EEI price rose 1.8 cents per gallon to $4.62, following last week's increase of 8 cents per gallon. This price is still way off the October high, which was over $5.30. More declines for the benchmark price may be on the horizon as the price of diesel on the CME commodity exchange settled at $3.11 per gallon after taking a wild ride through the first part of January. Microplant developer Arrival is shaking up its workforce, cutting 800 jobs and naming a new CEO as of yesterday. The company has had a tough time conserving cash as it tries to reach production of Class 1 delivery vans, of which it currently has customers waiting for those vans, including UPS. Arrival is one of the companies that went public during the SPAC frenzy of the last 2 years, and it's now added to the list of companies struggling to survive after those SPAC decisions. Igor Torgov will now serve as permanent CEO, succeeding Peter Queno, who led the company through the 2021 SPAC. The shift from West to East Coast ports has been prolific this year, even as container volumes decline. But double-digit import growth from Europe is another piece to why the East Coast continues to do so well. Europe to East Coast spot rates remain almost triple their pre-pandemic levels and more than triple the rates of the Asia to West Coast markets right now. Different spot rate indexes for Europe to the East Coast, of course, show different numbers. They show the same trends. The rates are coming down slowly and still have a long way to go. New data released from the American Forest and Paper Association shows demand and output for cardboard boxes and other packaging materials fell sharply in the fourth quarter of last year, the latest indicator that consumer demand is indeed waning. U.S. box shipments fell by 8.4% in Q4, with one analyst saying that this is the biggest quarterly decline since the Great Financial Crisis in 2009. Nearly 20% of the United States' capacity to produce boxes was stagnant last quarter. Supplies of container board, which is used to make corrugated boxes, stood at 4.3 weeks of back supply. LTL carrier Saia has implemented a 6.5% general rate increase for shipments subject to general tariff rules and also raised accessorial and minimum charges effective as of Monday. The company said the increases are partially to offset the rising costs of investing in labor, real estate, tech, and equipment. A year ago, Saia's GRI was expected to average a 7.5% increase. The company has opened 18 new terminals in the last 2 years and relocated several sites into better suited locations, and there are also more plans for terminal expansion this year. The GRI is slightly higher than its peers, with companies like Yellow, ArcBest, and T-Force Freight raising rates 5.9%. And you can find these stories and more up on FreightWaves.com and by logging into our FreightWaves app. Give us a like and subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube, and a follow on social media as well. Head on over to tv.freightwaves.com to catch anything you might have missed from our shows today or yesterday. And right now we're going to toss things back over to the wall for our next carrier update with Tony and Donnie.
Welcome into this carrier update. Donnie, we left off talking about some of those markets that were popping up in the map. We're going to take a little deeper dive, one of those starting at Baltimore.
Yeah, and so here as we get close to the end of the month of Baltimore, you see it boost up here on the 22nd, 23rd, but kind of falling back off here as we get to the 30th at 77.30. And we see rejection rates reacting too. Now, it's not a huge reaction. Look, we went from 2% to 2.44. It's pretty much doubled. But it's in the right direction.
Yep.
And those are, like I say, those are some signs. I'm trying to bring out some of the positive signs that we're seeing in the markets. I don't want people getting complacent. Being like, oh, it's down to 3.5%, forget it. No, watch some of these markets, watch the changes. Even in Baltimore, if you have freight that's headed west, I would be looking at these rejection rates. I'd be pushing my rates up for number one, because you're probably going to be crossing weather in your path, which means a lot of people may not want that freight. So if you're picking up same day freight, even though our market dashboard is going to give you a figure, it's not taking in consideration weather. So I've tried to push that up to the higher end of what our range is, a little bit higher. Now, here on our next chart, we want to go to Minneapolis. Another one of these that we saw that had a lot of change.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing this explosion in rejection rates here. I mean, you're going from sub 6% to 8.5%, and really, volume levels have been pretty consistent during this same time frame. But I mean, to see where these rejection rates have gotten, I mean, we're talking the highest level that they've been any time in the past month. I mean, even higher than what we saw during the holiday. And I think that's the positive sign as we head into the end of the month. And you see volume levels even pick up a little in the past couple of days, which is, again, one of those positive signs as we progress through the rest of the month. And I mean, really, outside of this bump, right, when we saw volume levels come back from the holiday, they're at the highest level they've been as that 7-day rolling average kind of dropped off this peak.
Yeah, and so, like I say, this is what we want to find. And then once we find this is, go into your market dashboard, start testing these theories, start testing what you find, and see how the markets are reacting. Run those lanes that you would normally run, or run those lanes that you would, if you were accepting something into Minneapolis, run that lane back and see what the backhaul looks like.
Yep.
Let's go to the next market here right quick. We'll look at Indianapolis. And again, we see it picking up, but it's not a huge pickup. It's from, right around 3% up to 4.36%. But again, it's moving in the right direction. However, we do see volumes are kind of slacking off here as we go through the month. But we'll look at a few of the runs out of Indianapolis as well and see how they're working and see if we can find some of those lanes across the Midwest, across the U.S. that are still pushing that $3 plus per mile.
Absolutely. Well, Donnie, thank you so much for the update. We'll be sure to check in with you again a little later. Right now, we'll hand it back over to Kaylee and Anthony.
All right, y'all, thank you for that carrier update. We'll have one more before we're done here for the day. Right now, we're going to take a look at a FreightWaves feature, one of our newest shows here. Drilling Deep as the podcast with John Kingston, but it recently transformed into a TV show here at FreightWaves TV. We've got a snippet of it right now.
So let's say the rule goes into effect. You mentioned, well, first of all, you thought lawsuits were going to be filed by, let's say, state entities. So let's say they announce, well, the rule's going into effect. We've got a couple of tweaks. First of all, what do you think might be the calendar on when that might happen? And secondly, even if you start to get state lawsuits against the law immediately, do you also start to get enforcement actions pretty quickly as well? The two of them, I would assume, can move on parallel tracks.
They can, but here's my prediction. And look, take this and $5 and it'll get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks.
If I didn't think your prediction was good, I wouldn't have had you on Drilling Deep. Come on now.
Well, here's what I think is going to happen. This rule probably gets published by somewhere in the middle of the second quarter of this year, June or so, and there'll be a date set in there in which it will go into effect. Probably, I'd say 90 days after publishing, and then pretty much immediately thereafter, you're going to have a lawsuit filed by trucking associations, probably state attorneys general, and it'll be filed most likely in Texas or Louisiana, because there have been a lot of these lawsuits seeking to invalidate regulatory developments have had some success in those venues. And then you're probably going to get a judge that will enjoin the enforcement of the rule while that lawsuit is pending, okay? And so enforcement activity will be put on hold, most likely, I think, until the district court rules. Now, everything I've said so far is pretty solid. Whether a judge will invalidate the rule or not, I don't know. I've got some questions about that, because this economic realities test, it's not so dramatically different from tests that have been used in the past.
Right, and let's point out that the Trump administration rule, which is in effect now, does use the economic realities test, but just with a somewhat different interpretation, correct?
Yes, it's fewer factors, and it doesn't focus on reserved right of control. It focuses largely on actual exercise of control. So put that in layman's terms, just because the contract says you can do it, but you don't actually do it, that's reserved right of control. But under the DOL's view now, if your contract says you can control that aspect of the relationship, that's reserved right of control. It doesn't matter whether you actually do it or not. Just because you reserve the right to be able to do that, that's indicia of an employee-employer relationship. So there's no doubt that the impact and the intent of this proposed rule is to reclassify a huge swath of current independent contractors as W-2 employees for lots of various, public policy related and political reasons.
Now, there's two ways of getting there. Let's say the rule goes into effect. One would be if the Wage and Hour Division takes an action against a particular company, and the other would be companies just simply changing their way of doing business, their contracts, whatever, to make sure that they don't become the target of an action. And I'm going to guess there are going to be more companies that fall under that definition than the ones that actually are targeted by an action from the Wage and Hour Division.
Yes, I mean, the vast majority of employers don't really want to take on the federal government and the Department of Labor in some piece of litigation. And so they'll direct their efforts most likely towards compliance as opposed to challenging the law. Most of the serious challenges are probably going to come from associations like the American Trucking Association, state attorneys general, and that'll be the lawsuit. And then the result of that will indicate whether that rule really goes into effect against employers. And then, of course, if the rule does go into effect and it's ultimately upheld by the courts, ultimately probably the Supreme Court, I can very easily see this issue making its way all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, then, of course, employers are going to have to, or companies are going to have to change their practices, alter their contracts, and in many instances, reclassify independent contractors as employees and just comply in that way, because there are some situations where you're not going to be able to have these workers classified as independent contractors just by nature of the industry and what they're doing and the control that has to be exerted or at least reserved over what those folks are doing. The trucking industry could be one of those. Healthcare could be another.
One thing I was thinking early was, well, even if the rule goes into effect, let's say you had a change of control in the White House after the 2024 election, they can come in and the next administration can come in and just yank the rule. But I think what's happened to the Biden administration rule, that would be a cautionary tale for, let's just assume for argument's sake there's a Republican administration after the 2024 election. I think based on what's happened with this rule, that next administration might not want to yank the Biden rule that quickly. And I guess what I'm suggesting here is that, is it possible that the Biden administration rule on independent contractors outlasts the Biden administration, even if you have a change of power in the White House?
It could, but with the political atmosphere that we have right now, I could easily see, one thing, one game that's being played out here is trying to tie this up in the courts so long that it never really actually goes into effect until such time as the White House changes hands, and then it can be rescinded before it goes into effect.
Right, but back to our earlier discussion, the issue I think here would be how many companies change their operations to comply with the law, even if it's tied up in the courts, because they want to keep themselves safe? Or do they stand back and they say, you know what, let's just wait and see how this plays out? I mean, what would you advise your clients?
Well, in this particular situation, I would advise my clients to wait to see if the rule actually goes into effect and survives any legal challenges, because there's going to be a substantial legal challenge here. Now, this reminds me, if you recall a few years ago, under the Obama administration, where towards the end, there was this substantial change in the salary level test for exempt employees under the Fair Labor Standards Act, where the salary level was going to go from about $24,000 a year to in the high 40s. And so a lot of employers went ahead and raised the salary levels for their exempt level employees, thinking that that rule was going to go into effect. And then all of a sudden, a court enjoined the enforcement of that particular rule. And in fact, it never went into effect. I mean, we eventually got a different change in the salary level test last year, but it wasn't as dramatic as the rule was under the Obama administration. But in this particular case, I think employers should wait to see, before they undertake a huge overhaul of their independent contractor relationships, take a wait and see approach to see, one, whether this rule gets enjoined. I think it probably will. We'll know that by middle of the year, June, July, August, and then see if it survives the court challenge. Because for many employers, this is going to be a very dramatic change in how they conduct their business.
Welcome back again. Of course, you can catch Drilling Deep on Fridays right here on FreightWaves TV and find it on a podcast player of your choice as well. And you can catch all of John Kingston's editorial content up on FreightWaves.com. We're going to go ahead and continue talking about the winter weather moving its way across the southeastern parts of the United States. And again, watching some really dangerous driving conditions set up all the way from central Arkansas in through western Tennessee. And we're even watching that colder air drop up into the Virginias, into Kentucky. So let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events right now. We can see, because we still have that radar turned on, like I mentioned earlier, the line between rain and that freezing precipitation is literally razor thin right now. So for us here in Chattanooga, we're looking at just about a 20-mile difference separating all rain and separating snow going on up towards the Nashville area. Because of that, we've got winter weather advisories in place from Nashville moving northward into all of central Kentucky, including Louisville and Lexington, and then moving up to the northeast into the Charleston, West Virginia area, and then up through pretty much all of West Virginia. You've got snow going up there right now, I-77 corridor through Charleston and northward, as well as the interstate running through the mountains of the Appalachians there. But on the southern side of the Appalachians, the North Carolina and Tennessee side, it is all rain through there. We will see that transition over from rain into snow starting into tonight and then lasting through tomorrow morning. So that I-40 corridor moving eastward from Knoxville and towards the Asheville area could expect to get a little bit icy, driving conditions be a little dicey by the time that the evening rolls around. As far as the Nashville Metroplex goes, we're seeing just a little bit of traffic impact so far this morning. Roadways are mostly wet right now, but as that colder air continues to sink in, we will see the potential for some icing going on. The real traffic problem for us here in the south is going to be Memphis. There are several areas of I-40 through Memphis that are completely shut down this morning due to accidents, road closures going on there, and especially on the west side of the Memphis Metro. Once you cross the Mississippi, driving that section of I-40 between Memphis and Little Rock is impossible right now because of the ice that's going on there. We're in a little bit of break from precipitation, but as we can see back farther to the south-southwest, we're going to be getting another round moving up through parts of eastern Texas today into tomorrow. tomorrow. So that's only going to continue for this ice storm developing as we move throughout the middle parts of the week. We'll take one more look at the weather before we're done here for the day. Right now, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Research Corner. The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
What does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked.
People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation, inflation, inflation.
This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
Welcome into this week's edition of the Research Corner. I'm Tony Mulvey, joined by Joe Antoshuk. Joe, how's it going?
Hey, Tony, what's up? Good morning.
Good morning. Great to have you. Obviously, we're now the end of January, but that means we're right in the middle of earnings season, which gives us a chance to, one, look back at what happened and kind of compare it with what we see within Sonar, but also hear some commentary from management teams across the industry of what they're seeing, what they're expecting, and the like. So really last week we got the largest player in the truckload space, Knight-Swift. I mean, you're talking about a company that has almost 20,000 tractors, 79,000 trailers. So, I mean, you're talking a massive carrier with a lot of exposure, and they've been one in the space that's been kind of expanding out, branching out through acquisitions into the LTL space. They have their brokerage arm, they have an intermodal play, and really, so looking at their earnings results kind of is a gauge of what some of these larger carriers are feeling, and obviously we saw a miss on the bottom line. Not really a surprise. I think that was kind of that's going to be a theme we see throughout the entire earnings season, but reading into some of the results, quite interesting, especially when you see, we'll pull up a chart. We've got our outbound tender volume index chart, and just to put this quote with it, it says, the freight market continues to show lines of here as we go through January. There's a good chance that after we complete the first quarter, we'll look back and this might be the most benign change sequentially from a fourth quarter to a first quarter. And that comes from Dave Jackson, CEO over there at Knight-Swift. And we look here at OTVI there in that white line. We obviously see the decline year over year, but comparing the green line to the white line. But then you see Q1 volumes have held up okay here in January. I mean, Joe, when you hear that quote and you see this line, what do you expect, or what do you take away from those two?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, it's, we don't know yet if when Q1 earnings come out, 3 months from now, if we're going to start to be able to see kind of this bounce back in like the truckload space, right, when it comes to earnings. But I don't think that sort of these Knight Swift earnings are totally negative. Like there are some positives to take from it. The major theme being that like with a diversified business model in this space, you can still be finding a way to do okay, and I think that that other theme in the earnings call was sort of like, it's not like this downturn has just started, like we've been dealing with this for about a year now, so we're sort of fast approaching the bottom, and I think potentially right with Q1 earnings, but certainly in the second half of the year, you're going to start to see some improvements there. And I think that's a positive thing to take away here.
Yeah, for sure. And we've got another chart that's going to highlight it's our NTI and our contract rate. And we can kind of see how those averages and how they've moved. So we have that fourth quarter average there in that solid line across the average. So in Q4, the average contract rate was 266 per mile, average spot rate there at 261. We've fallen well below that on both ends, right? So we necessarily haven't hit the bottom, but we can see that we have declined here sequentially into Q1, which was kind of expected, especially on the contract rate side. And they talked about it in their earnings results that we see contract rates kind of follow this cycle in 6 to 8 months after spot rates. So really going to start to see those declines intensify. But I think some of the other interesting points to point out, you saw load in miles per tractor, so those revenue generating miles were down 4.9%. Obviously that's a result of lower volumes overall. And we see that with OTVI. But an adjusted operating ratio was up 800 basis points. So from 74.7% to 82.7%, but really 82.7% is still pretty good during a time where you're facing higher operating expenses and things like that. So, overall, the business itself is relatively strong. That could have easily been up near the 90s, given some of the conditions that we have. So obviously they were able to navigate through kind of these turbulent waters in the quarter. Now it's going to be interesting. What do we see in Q1? Because Q1 of 2022 was likely the strongest or the second strongest behind Q2. Really, Q1 was probably the strongest in 2022. And now we're going to go up against difficult comps. It's going to be interesting to see how expectations change across the board in terms of like profitability and things like that. What these analysts are expecting overall.
Yeah, I think that's right. And that was one of the concerns, right, that some analysts had. Is like, well, these earnings that Knight Swift just released are you can take some positives from them. The overarching fear is that they did not do enough to reduce. They haven't done enough to reduce sort of operating expenses, right? And there are potentially some pretty significant headwinds still out there. One of them being, I think we have a chart for this, consumer debt, right? The amount of consumer debt, the amount of debt that consumers are taking on is still rising. And that debt is, of course, more expensive than it was before the pandemic. So there are very real fears here that we could be headed for a severe downturn that would put companies like Knight Swift in a much worse position coming off of these difficulties they're already experiencing.
Yeah, that chart, just real quick to touch on it, is that consumer credit that we talk about all the time, where it's rising, but it's also that average interest rate for credit cards just going exponential. I mean, we talked from 15% to 19% and climbing. So, Joe, that does it all the time, or that's all the time we have for this week's edition of the Research Corner. Thank you so much for joining me. Right now, we'll take a quick break, but we'll be back with more FreightWaves Now.
Hey everybody, this is Thomas Watson, enterprise trucking carrier expert here at FreightWaves, telling you about my show, Loaded and Rolling. Now, it involves trucking topics for large carriers and even small ones that wish to be large. Anything that impacts trucking, you can get it there. You can catch us every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern on tv.freightwaves.com. We do it live.
When guests come to an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
Good day coming.
And welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for our final check of the weather this morning. Moving back into Texas as that winter storm continues to drop just a ton of precipitation across the majority of the state. We've got winter storm warnings in place all the way from the Texas-Mexico border through the I-10 corridor up to I-20 into the Dallas-Fort Worth Metro. The Dallas-Fort Worth Metro getting the brunt of the storm right now. Let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events. Still have that radar turned on. We can see that the radar is picking up most of this wintry precipitation, even though a lot of this right now is actually hitting the surface as freezing rain. So most up in the higher levels of the atmosphere, we do have still that wintry precip, the snow, the sleet mixed, but a lot of this is now hitting the ground as that freezing rain with some just snow mixed in. And this is kind of worst case scenario for Texas right now because you have a pretty decent amount of sleet that fell yesterday, hasn't been able to melt because of the cold temperatures, and now you're putting freezing rain on top of that. So you're encasing the ice precipitation in now another layer of ice. It's going to make it difficult to melt for the next 2 days, but by the end of the week, we'll be back up into the 50s. So right now, traffic is just an absolute nightmare all around these areas from I-35, the Texas-Oklahoma border, down through the Dallas-Fort Worth Metro, and then down into Waco and Austin. Several pileups today alone, just within the Dallas-Fort Worth Metro and then down towards Austin as well. And we actually have some viewer photos. I say viewer photos, they came from my mom. My mom, who lives just north of the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. This was yesterday in the Denton area, a foot of sleet. So yes, that is 12 inches of sleet that fell and drifted up over in their house there just north of the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. And like I said, that sleet drift now encased in a layer of ice. So kind of worst case scenario there, that icy precipitation covered now in the freezing rain. Roads out there are a disaster. So if you don't have a good reason to be out on the roadways today, just don't do it. Stay home. Like I said, though, the interesting thing, we'll be back up into the 50s by the time that the week ends there across central Texas. So this should start to melt pretty quickly once we hit Thursday evening into Friday. That's it for the weather today. We will keep watching on that as we move throughout the rest of the week. Right now, we'll hand it back over to Isaiah for our final social roundabout.
Welcome into Social Roundabout, everyone. I'm Isaiah Buchanan, and there was some interesting happenings down in Atlanta early Saturday morning. An officer had pulled someone over around 2 in the morning. They had a headlight out, and as he was talking to them, someone got in his car and drove off in his police vehicle. You can see this video here. He's talking with the man that he had pulled over. He runs back to his car because somebody's got in it, and they drive off. The officer then begins to alert other officers that his car has been stolen. He lets them know where that car is heading, and this car then gets on the highway. You can see he's not even trying to hide the fact that he's in a police car. He's driving with all the lights on and not even attempting to make it look like this is not a car that's been stolen. But he drives on the highway for several miles. He comes across some train tracks and flips the vehicle. As you see, it's on its side. And when it's on its side, he's stuck in the vehicle. The cops surround it. They have to work to pull him out. And if you hear in the background, you'll begin to hear a train horn. This man right here, you can tell he's very scared because you can start to hear, there's a train, there's a train. And he is just very scared trying to get out of that vehicle to make sure he doesn't get hit by the train. He was charged with, he has a lot of charges against him now after being arrested. So people, just don't steal cop cars. It's really not that hard. Now, switching things up just a little bit, out in Hawaii, a family that just rebuilt their home now has a whole list of things to fix after a boulder came crashing through their wall. Take a look at this video.
You okay? Whoa. Whoa, rock fell out of you. Oh. Oh my God. What happened? Oh shit, glass. Oh.
Scary scene out there in Hawaii. I mean, that woman was only just a few feet away from being taken out by that boulder, but everyone was okay in that situation. That's all I have for the social roundabout right now. I'm going to toss things over to Bill Priestley for our roundtable.
And welcome into the Roundtable. Bill Priestley here with you. And last week we had the released new numbers from the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse, knowing how many positive tests we've seen in 2022 this year as opposed to 2021 and 2020. Joining us to talk about these, we've got Marilyn Serber, who joins us from 10th Street, also on the road. And also we've got Jeremy Raymer, CEO of Driver Reach, old friends back in the house. Thank you both for joining us. Let me throw up this chart that we've got that shows the numbers that came out. And you'll notice that if you take a decent look at this, that the numbers kind of basically go down from 2020 to 2021. And then we get as much as an 18% increase across the board and a 30% increase in some areas, marijuana being the number one culprit in that particular regard there as well. Marilyn, let me start with you. Sobering in the fact that we shouldn't necessarily see increases like this, or affirming because maybe things are just a bit stressful and we knew this was possibly going to happen? What's your take on the numbers?
My take on the numbers is that definitely the clearinghouse is doing what it's supposed to do. And I think we're seeing, as the clearinghouse gets longer in tenure, we're seeing more activity, if you will. There's more and more compliance. There's increased compliance. And then I also think there may be something that speaks to the number of new entrants that were hired last year over other years since the pandemic and since the clearinghouse. And I think we're going to see higher positivity rates on new entrants and people who are not familiar with the clearinghouse when they're coming in. And so I think that could also be leading to an uptick last year as we really saw student hiring and training return to record levels last year.
Gotcha. Jeremy, what's when you look at the numbers, what do you see?
Well, I 100% agree with my esteemed colleague here, Marilyn, on the fact that the clearinghouse is doing its job, no question. And I'm not surprised, honestly, though, when especially marijuana, when you see an increase like that, state after state continues to, enable marijuana as a legal drug of choice. And so from that standpoint, marry that up with some of Marilyn's comments about getting, new people into the industry. It's not a surprise. And I would expect us to continue to see this trend, maybe and hopefully not such a trajectory, but I mean, unfortunately, that's the way the world is working today, especially with marijuana use. It's becoming more and more accepted, even though obviously not so in the case of a highly regulated trucking industry.
Marilyn, one of the things that we talked about, I think it was last week or maybe even 2 weeks ago, was this kind of migration from owner-operators, the independent contractors, owner-operators, into larger carriers, and perhaps that also stimulates more of the pre-employment screening process, which could be part of this there as well. Do you see that contributing to why these numbers jump, perhaps?
Yeah, I absolutely. I think that, the larger the carrier, the more likely they are to be compliant. And I think that they're doing, the large carriers are doing screenings and running reports throughout the year to kind of go above and beyond to protect themselves from nuclear verdicts. And so I think all of those things lend themselves to those numbers going up. And just like Jeremy mentioned, he's absolutely right. As more states legalize marijuana, and honestly, as the average age of a driver trends younger, there's going to be more positives for marijuana. I mean, if you think about somebody who's 22 or 23 right now coming in to the industry, they haven't really grown up in a world where they think marijuana is bad. They don't maybe even remember a time where it was illegal in all 50 states. And so I think you have to remember that's a mind shift. We're dealing with a different generation of driver that's coming on board, and that makes all the difference. And so I think we have to understand that that's the population that we're dealing with, and that's the world that we live in. It's not permitted in our industry for good reason, right? But I think we as an industry, we need to be looking forward and thinking about what we're going to do to get our arms around this so that we can continue to attract the next generation of labor into our job.
Yeah, Jeremy, let's continue along that line with marijuana. I mean, how much is this related to, say, for instance, education, in the fact that if you're a carrier in a state where marijuana is legal and you send a driver to a state where it's not legal, how much more perhaps education along those lines do drivers need to have, especially, of course, along the fact that we now know that marijuana stays in the system much longer than, say, alcohol?
Well, I think that's the biggest problem, right? Alcohol, that's easy to detect, right? If you get pulled over and you're under the influence, there's tests that can be taken right there, curbside, and you're going to be arrested. But that's not the case with marijuana. I would think probably by and large, even those who have failed marijuana tests, and are now in the clearinghouse with a positive test, probably almost all of them were not under the influence of marijuana at the time that test was taken. So I think if and when we can ever get to the point where you are testing for being under the influence at that time, I think that's going to be a big differentiator, and we'll probably relax or loosen the marijuana laws as it pertains to CDL employment. It's to your point, it stays in the system for weeks, in probably 30 plus days in some cases. And so from that standpoint, being able to detect that, I think would really shift the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Marilyn, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think I know that is something that we're working on. And I think we really, as an industry, need to get behind that and figure out how that fits into the culture of trucking, because there's a lot of work to do there. There's a lot of work, I think, to do in our culture of our industry to where that would even be okay once we can do it. I think people have a lot of strong opinions. And I think also one of the things that we can do is work on a return to duty and SAP process that is utilized in our industry, but also that's accepted by our industry, that insurance companies and carriers can get behind and say, yes, this is how we're going to rehabilitate these drivers, especially when it is the marijuana. If it was medical marijuana or legal marijuana, I think we have to get to a place where we're looking at those things differently instead of just a one size fits all.
Jeremy, shifting back in the different direction, we had those numbers again showing a 10% increase, say for instance in, there they have them again, a 10% increase in methamphetamine, a 10% increase in oxycodone. These are not gateway drugs. You don't necessarily start out with this kind of stuff. As you look at it from a driver recruitment standpoint, how tough do carriers now have to be knowing that there's been this 10% increase in drugs that, aren't just kind of your drug of leisure, if you will?
Yeah, well, those, I don't categorize those as recreational drugs. I mean,
no,
that's a greater concern to me than the marijuana. And I was 22 once, right? I mean, I was there. I was a young kid and made some bad decisions when I was young. I think those are not the same. And I'm not a big proponent of even marijuana being a gateway drug. I mean, and again, not that I want to come on your show and encourage people to even, use marijuana, but I don't think that those things are the same.
Yeah.
I know that they don't have the same impact on somebody, and certainly not when it's, something that is done over the course of a weekend or something like that. So those other numbers are really concerning to me, the methamphetamines and so on.
Marilyn, as you look at those numbers, I mean, again, talking from a driver recruitment standpoint, in terms of, who you hire, how much tougher, if you will, would you be in 2023 as opposed to 2022 when we didn't necessarily see this onset coming, this 10% rise that we're seeing now?
Yeah, I agree. I think that those numbers are concerning, and there's no space for that in our industry or behind the wheel. And so I think you have to be tough. I think you have to clearly communicate what you're going to test drivers on, and what kind of communicate about the clearinghouse up front. Again, schools, starting in truck driving school, before they even enroll in truck driving school, do they know what the drug and alcohol clearinghouse is? And so I think that we have to let people know what that is, and continue to flush out those folks who are, oxycodone and methamphetamine, they're not recreational drugs. They're not something that's usually, somebody would just be doing on the weekend or something. That's usually a habitual problems. And so I think we want to continue to catch those folks and eliminate them from our industry, and then figure out how to rehab maybe those marijuana guys and gals that are coming into the industry and making a mistake. As Jeremy said, we were all 22 once. We've all made mistakes. And so that doesn't, in my mind at least, doesn't mean that person should never be able to drive a truck again.
Gotcha. Jeremy, real quick, we only got about 15 seconds or so here. Any sign of any regulation or any kind of truck perhaps changing their regulations in terms of how they recruit, saying, look, if you get caught with this, the penalties are going to be more severe?
Well, I think kind of to Marilyn's point, you got to be tough, because those are the rules that we're playing. That's the field that we're, operating under today. But that being said, until or unless we can detect the marijuana usage, I don't think that's going to change. I think that's always going to be something that's being tested for among all the other illegal narcotics.
Hopefully those numbers do indeed come down. Marilyn and Jeremy, thanks so much for joining us for our roundtable.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Jeremy.
All right, thank you. And we will take a short break. Right back after this with more FreightWaves Now.
The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. Time for one final check of this morning's headlines. New data released from the American Forest and Paper Association shows demand and output for cardboard boxes and other packaging materials fell sharply in the fourth quarter of last year, the latest indicator that consumer demand is waning. U.S. box shipments fell by 8.4% in Q4, with one analyst saying that this is the biggest quarterly decline since the Great Financial Crisis in 2009. Nearly 20% of the U.S. capacity to produce boxes was stagnant last quarter. Supplies of containerboard, which is used to make corrugated boxes, stood at 4.3 weeks of back supply. LTL carrier Saia implemented a 6.5% general rate increase for shipments subject to general rules tariffs, and also raised accessorial and minimum charges effective as of Monday. The company said the increases are partially to offset the rising cost of investing in labor, real estate, tech, and equipment. A year ago, Saia's GRI was expected to average a 7.5% increase. The company has opened 18 new terminals in the last year and relocated several sites into better situated locations, and there are also more plans for terminal expansion this year. This GRI is slightly higher than its peers, with companies like Yellow, ArcBest, and T-Force Freight raising rates 5.9%. And railcar manufacturer and lessor GATX is confident in the railcar market for the year, despite the macroeconomic uncertainties. During its fourth quarter earnings call, President and CEO Robert Lyons questioned whether or not we will slip into a recession, but said the company is in a good spot no matter what. Earnings per share grew 20% in 2022, and the company saw a net income of $48.4 million in the fourth quarter. The company posted $83.5 million in profit for the quarter, a nearly $8 million increase year over year. And you can find these stories and so much more over on FreightWaves.com and our FreightWaves app. Give us a like and subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube, and don't forget to follow us on social media as well. Head on over to tv.freightwaves.com for a recap of anything you might have missed from this morning. Right now, we're going to toss things back over to Tony and Donnie for our final carrier update.
Welcome into this final carrier update, Donnie. It's our lanes of the day. New Orleans was one of those markets popping up in one of our maps. Going to take a look here at this lane, Atlanta to New Orleans.
Yeah, so there's a lot of freight. They'll be from the Atlanta market or near the Atlanta market, probably going down to the New Orleans area. So I decided to start in that direction. Of course, we got it pulled up here. NTI dropped to 244, and you can see here these rates are dropping as well. But at least it's still above that NTI at 261. Yeah. But New Orleans can be a tough market. A lot of people may or may not want to go down to New Orleans for a good reason. Volumes can be tough. Volumes can be low. Yep. A lot of items coming out of the oil industry that require either maybe possibly hazmat or tanker endorsed. So they may not have the license to get a lot of those loads. So I hit my little double arrows button and check out maybe New Orleans coming out of Atlanta. Here, the next chart here. And we'll see what those rates are coming out of New Orleans. It was 286 running, or 286 is running out, so a little bit better. But as you can see, New Orleans was blue. We saw an increase in the rejection rates here, and this has been climbing up now, so it's a little bit better coming out of New Orleans than going in. But we're looking still about a 272 average, 273 average. Yeah. So not a bad average for a 470-mile run. But it could be a little bit better.
And it broke away from the NTI. I mean, if you look at, really since mid-November, it's been tracking the NTI pretty close, and it's broken away since that, thanks largely due to that increase in rejection rates. I mean, capacity tightened up there, pushed rates higher, whereas the overall market rejection rates are kind of stagnant at that 3.8%, and you see it with the rates continuing to decline on a national level.
And this is going to be one of the few. Next chart here, check out the next lane here. Indianapolis to Baltimore, again, we still kind of follow that same pattern. Yep. The rates are still pretty good at $3.19, and you're headed to the northeast, or these bottom part of the Northeast. And we're still at 319. We know was up around 350, but it's dropped down in the last few weeks to 319. But if we hit the little double arrows to see going Baltimore back, which Baltimore did show blue, but we're also leaving an area that everybody's trying to get out of and heading back to the Midwest, pushes this rate down to $2.08.
Yeah.
So here, this is going to be a pretty tough average to run out of, but you may try to find, something maybe a little bit shorter than 600 miles to get you maybe across PA into Ohio and then find you another load with a better lane. But if we go up into the Northeast, one more chart here right quick. Baltimore going into Buffalo, we're at 347.
Yeah.
So the rates are there out of Baltimore. It's just not headed to the Midwest, which is the hottest market in the U.S.
Yep, absolutely. Donnie, thank you so much for the updates this morning. We'll be sure to check in with you again tomorrow. Right now, we'll hand it back over to Kaylee and Anthony.
All right, guys, thank you for that. We're done here for your Tuesday, but not to worry, we've got plenty more coming up on FreightWaves TV.
That's right. There's still more FreightWaves content coming up. In just a few moments, we're going to have Put That Coffee Down with Kevin Hill, and that's going to be on today. We're also going to have Great Quarter Gals. That's going to be on with our very own Kaylee Nix here.
This is going to be a great episode today, so make sure that you tune in. Hosting Charlie Safro, of course, the head of CS Recruiting. We're talking a little bit about, ghosting in the hiring atmosphere. It's a spooky episode today. You don't want to miss it.
That seems to be very much, I think, well-themed, especially during this economy right now. But that's not going to be it for this week because we have more FreightWaves Now coming up tomorrow. And of course, get registered for our next virtual event free of charge.
We'll see you guys tomorrow. Investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city